Welcome to the Hit Like a Girl podcast. This is High Tea with Grace, where we spill the tea on HIT. I have a very special guest today here to talk with you about clinicians and burnout and grief and just what clinicians are experiencing right now. Her name is Stephanie Queen. She's SVP. She's a CNO of Air Methods, and Air Methods is the America's leading emergency air medical services. Wicked Top Gun vibes. I'm very excited to have this Maverick on the show. Thanks so much for joining us, Stephanie.
Appreciate it. It's an honor.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. What does Air Methods do, and what's your role at the company?
Sure. So Air Methods is a critical care transport company. I think what's really amazing about us are our frontline workers, who are comprised of pilots, mechanics, clinicians, paramedics, and nurses. And what we do is basically all across the country, we have 300 plus bases in 48 different states. We try to position ourselves in rural communities. We have hospital partners, EMS and fire partners, police, all the great things. And we basically try to, provide care for our communities where they don't have access to level 1 trauma centers or, specific stroke centers care that they need in remote communities. And so the beautiful thing for us, I think, is it's very easy to adapt to our mission. Saving lives is easy to attach to, but there's a lot that goes into that. And I'm really excited to be able to highlight today, the cost of what it is to really provide that care to our frontline workers. And, I think a lot has been highlighted since COVID has hit with this pandemic, but this topic has been around long before that. And so I really am excited to be able to speak to what we do and how we do it. I can only, give the accolades to our folks on the front line. I'm just lucky enough to be able to speak on their behalf. So what I do with the company
Truly, what a large company, and to be all over the country like that, serving these rural communities, the urban communities that really need the help that they could, every possible piece of help that they could possibly get. So what exactly is your role with Air Methods?
So I am the Senior Vice President and the Chief Nursing Officer for our clinical division. And so what that means is I have a very incredible team that I've surrounded myself with that have stuck with me. And what we do is we oversee the clinical care inside of the helicopter. And so, all of the care that they give, the patient care guidelines that they abide by, in conjunction with medical directors. We have 80 plus across the country. And so I work with all of these brilliant individuals to be able to make sure that our clinicians have what they need as far as equipment and, making sure that we are up to standard with evidence-based practice and all the things. And so, it's not me, it's my team. And I'm surrounded by not only an incredible clinical team, I have some pretty amazing executives that I work side by side with, at Air Methods that really support us. So that's kind of in a very large nutshell. Some of what I do, I've been a nurse for almost, I think almost 23 years. And it's been a wild ride. Never thought I would end up where I'm at. It's an honor, one thing to be in one state, but to be able to really help and oversee care in 48 different states, for those clinicians on the front lines, there's no better job than that. So.
Yes. Wow. And to be giving care in a helicopter and one of the most traumatic experiences in someone's life, possibly, they're obviously in these dire situations with these patients, and to manage care and make sure everything is flowing smoothly. I'm sure that's a tall order.
Yes, absolutely. It takes a very special person. This is I say to all of our clinicians often, and I've said it throughout my career, it's a calling. You have to be called to do this type of work. It's one thing to provide the care, but it's another to, I think, react quickly how they do. They have to think quickly, react quickly. They're at the top of their scope. These, you mentioned Top Gun, these guys are definitely an elite workforce that are practicing at the top of their scopes, both from a medic side, to a nursing side. And then you have our very skilled pilots who are, flying an aircraft with all of this going on in the background.
Oh my, wow.
But they are very skilled at what they do. And, seeing somebody fighting for their life, it takes a special personality to be attracted to that. but not only to do it, but to stick with it. And I think that's what I'm excited to highlight, during this podcast today, is really what it takes, but the toll that it takes on these guys, and how important it is to highlight, every hug that you give a patient, every support that you give them, and the things that you see, it changes you.
Wow, I can't imagine. So working alongside these clinicians every day, what is the impact of grief and burnout on clinicians, personally and professionally even? How does all of this impact the industry too?
Yeah, it's heavy. I would say, my entire career, I've been fortunate, and it's going to sound kind of crazy, but I've been surrounded by death and dying my entire career. And it takes, like I said, a special person, I think, to want to be part of something like that. But I think, no disrespect to any of, academia, I think we very much focus on the things that we have to, which are, understanding pathophysiology. How do you take care of these patients? How does the human body work? But a pivotal piece that I think is starting to shift in academics, is really, how do you deal with what you see? And I know in the beginning of my career, I wasn't prepared for that. I didn't understand, nor did I really had no idea how that was going to impact me, seeing somebody die, or fighting for their life. And, for me, my majority of my career has been in pediatrics. And so you not only take that, but then you take a child. Children aren't supposed to die. They're not supposed to suffer. And adults alike, right? Nobody likes to see human suffering. And so when you I think you have to compartmentalize that. At least I did in the beginning of my career. And I think that's, I've been studying grief since 2004.
Oh, wow.
Because something that I saw within my colleagues, in the beginning of my career, it was, I think, and a lot of healthcare workers can speak to this, in a hospital setting was the majority of my career. And, you would take these very ill patients, they would pass, and then you wouldn't even think about it. And you would take the next one, next admission, next patient thing. And you really didn't have time to decompress. And that was, again, in the early 2000s. I think we've made great strides. But I think grief on the industry, burnout in the industry is real. This year alone, I think we had some recent stats that I read from some published journals, stated that about 33% of specific critical care workers are just walking away.
Wow. I was going to ask, what are the impacts of this burnout and grief that's happening? And clearly people are starting to walk away from medicine altogether.
Yep. And I think for me, it's something that I never thought that I would see in my career, of just very passionate individuals just saying, I can't do this anymore. And I think that comes to a tipping point where people reach their breaking point. And, the stakes are high. I think the acuity level of patients are really intense right now. COVID has definitely, I think, impacted that severely. These are some of the sickest patients that I've ever seen in my career.
Do you think it's COVID itself, or patients putting off care because of concern of getting COVID?
That's both. Yeah. I think last year, 2020, when the pandemic initially started, you had a lot of folks who were, there was a lot of unknowns. And so a lot of people put off just seeking care. We couldn't help it, right? Because they closed a lot of our clinics across the country. Some of, your same day surgeries were put off. So those folks that could maintain now can't maintain anymore. And so I think what we're seeing is just they're sicker than they've ever been. And so I think, to really answer your question, grief has a significant impact on burnout. A lot of people talk about compassion fatigue and burnout in general, but grief is embedded in there. And I think as healthcare workers, right, we fix people. That's what we do. That's what we're passionate about. But if we don't take care of ourselves, eventually you see what we're seeing, and it's people walking away. And that's what keeps me awake at night. I think that everybody that is in medicine is in it for the right reasons. Nobody comes to work to say, I don't want to do a good job today. But when, you're dealing with a lot of different battles, both, professionally and personally, when you're not sleeping, or maybe you're not taking care of yourself, they compound. And if you don't talk about what you see, even with another peer, to say, I'm having a bad day today, I'm struggling, it can really take a toll. And I can only speak from personal experience. That's what I dealt with. I didn't realize there was a time when I was in critical care, walked away, I was in a leadership role, went in to kind of create a step down unit. And I didn't realize how burnt out I was. I used to, I had no idea. And I think when you're in that environment, that's high intensity, everything's, there's just a lot of stakes that are very high when you're working in this environment. I had used to pride myself. I would cry once a year. And I was like, and I was proud of that. Oh yeah, I can see children die. That doesn't affect me. Let's just take the next one. And then when I actually walked away, it took me about 6 months to realize that what I was doing and the way I was coping was not healthy. I wasn't taking care of myself. I would give everything I had when I was at work, but then when I got home, I had nothing. I literally, I'll never forget it. I was talking with a colleague, and he said something to me that really changed my life. And he was like, you know, do this day in, it was an intensivist, and he was like, I do this day in, day out. I give everything that I have. And this was a very respected, colleague and friend. He's like, but you know, when I get home, I have nothing left to offer.
And that's so rough.
I have nothing left to
It's
give.
it's not putting on your oxygen mask on yourself. It's putting it on other people. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, I'm out of oxygen.
Yeah.
I can't move on.
Right. Can't even.
For the people I love and my friends and family.
Correct. And that statement that he made, I think really changed a lot of the way that I really needed to take care of myself. Because if I'm going to be a leader, right, in the industry, and I'm going to be coaching, mentoring, doing whatever I can for teams that I'm leading, how can I do that and take care of them if I'm not taking care of myself? And so I think, oftentimes you don't think you need to. And I think we as healthcare workers are very good at just putting on a face. And, in the background, you do have a lot of feelings. I think specifically within critical care, I've been part of 2 seminal events in my career.
Oh, wow.
Unintentional deaths that, were caused by error that really changed my life. And I think for those, anytime you make a mistake, critical care personalities are very type A. And I'm speaking specifically about critical care because that's the realm that, we're in air methods.
Yes, of course. And this is what you're dealing with in the emergency medical services with the air. There's a reason they're in the air flying to get the help they need. So it makes sense. Yeah. And error makes in any industry is a nightmare, let alone in emergency medical services like this or emergency care at all.
Right. And so I think when, human error is common, when you look at safety statistics within healthcare, that's why we have so much emphasis and focus on creating a just culture so that you can try to, prevent mistakes before they happen. But if you are a healthcare worker who's experienced an error, it's really difficult. And you take it very personal, as you should, but you have to also pull yourself out of it. How do I get through this? Because the likelihood, I speak to our employees here, the likelihood, say, of something happening to you, Grace, if you were a clinician, you come into work every day saying, I'm going to do a great job. Nobody comes into work and says, today I'm really going to mess up. Nobody says that. But when you actually do have an error, it's hard because you have to be vulnerable to say, you know what, I made a mistake today and I need to speak up and say it because I don't want it to happen to Grace. You and I are, clinicians, we're both at the top of our scope. We're doing the best we can day in and day out. And so that's where I think, it's the peer-to-peer support. I think it's easy to say, okay, compassion fatigue, or I've been a CISM coordinator in the past, which is called critical incident stress management. And what they tell you is, you need to sleep, you need to do things you enjoy, you need to eat right. And that's all great. But when I make a mistake, I need my peer. I need to have number one, somebody I trust to go to and say, listen, I'm really struggling right now. I made a mistake. I don't know how to get through it. Or, hey, I just saw somebody die today that looked just like my child. That's, I think, what a lot of our crews struggle with, right? Or
so really, it's interesting too, that as a woman, we often understand the strength that comes through vulnerability, that, it sometimes comes more naturally to us just as women. Do you think that being a woman, and a leader in many ways gives you an innate instinct into this, or you did experience it yourself, you said, and it was hard to be vulnerable? Do you think it's more of a cultural society shift that has to just change over time?
100%. I think, females in general, I think at least the amazing mentors I've had in my career, have really helped me to do away with the old myth of, just put on a happy face and just get through it. I think you're strong boss ladies.
Yes.
I like to call them. I have one that I work with here at Air Methods. I think Jalen is our CEO and sets a great example of, what it looks like to be vulnerable, but also, hey, this is important. And I think when you have,
Mm,
leaders within your industry that are also demonstrating, listen, we as females care about this. This is a big deal. I think that helps to change the industry. And, even with, Air Methods, I have really great mentors where I got my doctorate. I went to Vanderbilt. And, I can't speak enough about those amazing women, and men that really help to guide. But I think this day and age, you have to be the example that of the change you want to see. And
yeah.
I think specifically with grief, you have to create a platform for clinicians to say, you know what, I'm not okay. And I think that's the biggest message I want to get across today is it's okay to not be okay.
Yes. And
And
it's so interesting to me that you had mentors that helped you with this and taught you this, and that vulnerability, which is seen as weakness to many people, is actually a strength and is something that needs to be exemplified at the highest levels.
100%.
Amplified and shown how it's done and how it's done well. And I'm sure too with clinicians, they probably worry about losing their license in certain instances when they're experiencing burnout and grief.
100%. I mean, there's the stakes. There's a lot that plays into it, right? You are coming into work day in and day out to be on your A game. At least in our current environment that we're in at Air Methods, these guys are responding to people that are fighting for their life,
Mm.
and you have to be on top of your game. But there's a lot of societal distractions, especially this time of year. The holidays for many are a joyous time, but for others, it's difficult. And there's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of stress, and that's just the holidays. Put on top
Yes. Yeah.
of COVID and healthcare and all the things within this political climate that we're in. I mean, there's just so many different things that are distractors. And so
Mhm.
for me, the message to our clinicians has really been take care of yourself. If
Mm.
you've had a bad transport or there's just somebody that you've transported that's really, touched your spirit. Oftentimes for me, what it is, I've spent the majority of my career, like I told you, in pediatrics, but a lot of our clinicians struggle with those pediatric traumas that we have, or somebody that looks like a family member. It just triggers something. It can be a smell, it can be
Mm.
all kinds of things. But I think that's when I say to them, if that's triggered something, first of all, talk about it. Say, listen, that was hard. We are really trying to work on a peer-to-peer support program here at Air Methods, um, and trying to develop, what does resiliency look like? Because that's what they do. They have to bounce back, and you have to be ready for the next call. And I
Mm.
think that's when you're called to this line of work. Um, it's it's hard because you love it, you're
Mhm.
passionate about it. This is what you've been called to do, but it's so easy to just put yourself on the back burner. And over time, if you don't pay attention to those subtle things, like maybe you're just not sleeping as well, or you're irritated, they compile. And for me, that's when I almost completely walked away from healthcare altogether when I was part of a specific Sentinel event that really hit home. And I thought to myself, I'm a terrible leader. I just need to leave the industry. I can't do this anymore. And luckily, I had a great team and I have a great husband who really
Mhm.
talked me through it and said, no, you need to stick with it. And so that's why I talk about this, because I think we all have a story. We all know somebody. I've had colleagues who've taken their own life. Um, and that's the message we have to get out to one another is we're here for each other. And I think for me, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a sister. Um, I'm a lot of things, but I think the biggest thing that I want to convey, to the audience today is love a healthcare worker, give them a hug. Um, I could cry, and I do it every time.
Mhm.
Yep.
I mean, this topic deserves tears because these people who are on the front lines, like yourself and your colleagues, they are risking their own mental health in the pursuit of saving people's lives. And it's such a shame that that has to be the case, but there's no other way. It's like we need people to do it. We need people to save lives and things happen, but it's just pretty heartbreaking, but amazing to have a leader like yourself who's experienced what you've experienced say this is not okay. We need to make changes. We need to take over the narrative.
Correct.
And change the narrative behind burnout and grief, and make sure these clinicians' stories are being told and that they're being supported by one another, because everyone's dealing with it.
Correct. And I think it's okay to say what you saw was difficult to see. I think some of the things that these guys, they're reacting to, it could be somebody with a stroke, it could be something, a multi, gunshot wound individual, it could be a car accident. It could be a burn. There's all kinds of things that they encounter, and they have to be ready for whatever, is coming through. And I have we have strong military presence of a lot of veterans here in the company, but my family included. And I think oftentimes I compare what we see as healthcare workers in critical care very similar to war zones that soldiers face.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Parallel, right? You go into a trauma bay, or you go into one of our helicopter airframes after say a very messy car accident, there could be blood all over the place. That alone is a visual that you never forget. And I think it's those things that you see. It's a war zone out there. And I think that some days that's how it feels. You're going to war, you're going to battle to save people's lives. But you have to recharge, you have to regenerate your spirit, you have to figure out and remember why you do this work, because it is stressful. It is hard. It's probably been the most, I have this letter, and I can always, share it with you, to share with the audience. It's long, so I won't read it because I can read it. You tell me what you want me to do.
I'll absolutely put a link to it under this today.
But I think that when you have this type of environment, I pause with these long pauses because it's heart-wrenching, but it's so rewarding.
Would you like to read the letter? Do you have it with you?
I do. You want me to read it?
Please read the letter. We'd like to hear it.
All right. Sometimes I cry, so you guys are going to have to just deal with it, but I think this will resonate. And
we'll cry along with you, sister. Right. Let's do it.
Stop everything. So I read this to our new hires. I wrote this, but I read it to our new employees that come into the company week after week. So I'll just read it, right? All right. A while back, I had read a letter that addressed how critical care clinicians don't discuss what they do for a living with others to spare the shock and awe conversation. When people hear that you work in critical care or you work with pediatric patients, the response is often something like this: "Oh, wow, I could never do that job." The letter resonated with me and caused me to pause and to self-reflect on how I have personally handled or dealt with the things that I have seen over the years in the field that I so dearly love. The letter started off by saying, "I know you mean well, but before you cover your mouth, your hand clutched to your chest, or you inhale sharply with shock, before you say the words, 'That must be so hard. I don't know how you do it.' I want to set the record straight. It is hard. It is very, very hard. I come from a military family, and I often compare the war zone I have encountered in critical care to be likely similar to war zones for soldiers. What we see day in and day out changes. It has been by far the most excruciatingly heart-wrenching, most stressful job I have ever encountered through my 23 years in healthcare. With the same heartache I've experienced, it has also been the most rewarding, life-fulfilling, and stimulating job I have ever had. What defines a critical care personality is typically someone who is an overachiever, a multitasker, compassionate, incredibly intelligent, type A, and they're usually very direct communicators. These characteristics define what I've always witnessed to be the best of the best in our healthcare industry. When approached by someone who finds out that you work in critical care, we often attempt to respond to their comments by saying things like, "Oh, you could do it. Let's not talk about me. What do you do for work?" I've also had someone look at me in sheer terror and say, "How the hell do you work with dying children day in and day out? You must hate being surrounded by that every day." My response is often something like, "Well, I guess I would just hate to do your desk job day in and day out." To each his own is my philosophy. Critical care clinicians are unsung heroes well before COVID who go to battle every day. Despite those we can't save, what truly brings us back is the ones we do. Many times I've heard clinicians say, "That patient will never survive." And weeks later, they either walk out of the hospital or they visit you at your base. And I've really learned quickly, never say never, as a patient will often surprise you. This job will truly pull at your heartstrings. Like I said, it is very hard. Beautiful things do happen in the war zones that we work in. Like I referenced in the beginning, the letter I read stated that they were over softening the blow of what critical care clinicians do. And I agree with their statement as well. It's time for us to have the ability to say how hard this amazing job truly is and why it changes you. This is really where a lot of the grief comes in, and you'll hear it.
Yes, truly.
In my time in critical care, I have done the unimaginable. I've witnessed children who were beaten to death by a family member who were brain dead, and I somehow had to still treat the family with respect who was sitting at their bedside who just beat their child to death. I've placed intravenous lines into children, teens, and adults into places you never thought a catheter could go. I've placed probes inside of toddlers' skulls. I've given medication to sedate adults and teens who were unsafe to themselves, and I pushed so hard on a chest during CPR that it cracked their ribs in a hope to save their life. Not to mention placing other tubes and other various openings in the body. I have helped to breathe for those who couldn't breathe on their own, or I've held a human heart in my hands, cardiac massaging until the family could arrive to say their last goodbye. I've been honored to witness both children and adults take their last breath. It's odd to say, but those moments are beautiful as birth. I'm not sure I can really explain the bravery of those facing death, children specifically. I've discussed with a 7-year-old that the cancer they were diagnosed with was ultimately going to take their life. And they looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's okay, I'm ready." I've also had another teenager who told me that if they could do it all over again, they wouldn't change a thing. This was a paraplegic patient who could no longer walk, but he said this was his way of God leaving a legacy for those behind. These intimate moments are what many don't see when dealing with critically ill individuals or dying patients. I've cried with families as we remove them from life support. I've been a sense of strength for moms, dads, siblings, and family members alike who couldn't hold it together as their most important person in their life was dying or clinging to life. I've walked and worked alongside the broken, myself included. I've hugged moms and dads and sat with them on the floor as we all cried about the fact that we couldn't save their loved one. I have talked to them, I've held them, and I've stopped them from shaking from tears, myself included. I've also swaddled dead babies, and I've carried them to my chest as we walk through the lonely halls to the morgue. Every clinical care clinician can tell you the harrowing sound of a family's scream as they lost a loved one. It's a permanent memory in my mind, and it always puts shivers down my spine. I've cried more tears than you will ever know. My car and my pillow could tell you so many stories. Through all the ups and downs of critical care medicine, one thing remains the same. We were never alone, and we always had each other.
Yes.
As we stabilized the spines of patients and we pushed blood into those who were bleeding out faster than their body could sustain, my team was always by my side. I mentioned working in this environment can also be beautiful. Seeing that patient you never thought was going to survive and come back to your base and say hello and walk into the base is why we do this crazy job. Through all the heartache and the intensity that defines critical care and the moments that we cared for critically ill patients, like I said, one thing has always been the same. We are never alone. My team was always by my side, supporting me, teaching me, helping me, and sharing in the trauma of caring for complete strangers. Over the years, we've saved a lot of lives. Alone, none of this is possible. Together, we help to make the world a better place. I have never been more proud than I am today of where I work and who I work alongside. I am honored to work alongside some of the most brilliant, talented individuals I have ever seen. I may never be able to put into words the trauma of caring for complete strangers, how every heartache that's placed in your hands, every story that touches your soul, every hug that you give to a family does take a tiny slice from your own. When I say this job is hard, it is. I will also never find the words to express how much I respect my team and the work that they do, and that goes for healthcare as a whole. I call them my work family. Nothing will ever do justice to the feelings that I carry with me in my heart. My colleagues are amazing. What we have been through and continue to go through is a gift to be a part of. To care for someone fighting for their life and to have an impact on that life is something none of us take lightly. There has been so much heartache, but alongside that ache in your heart, you smile to yourself knowing good things do happen. So when you hear where we work and what we do, when you cover your mouth in shock and say, it really takes a special person to work in a place like that, I want you to know the truth. You're right, it does.
Yes, Stephanie. Yes. That is how you change the culture.
Yeah.
That is powerful.
Thank you.
leading with your story of your patients and then moving into yourself as a patient and humanizing the clinician.
But that's the synopsis. That's what people don't see, right? And I think that's been the beautiful thing of COVID, is it really has highlighted many of our healthcare workers across the industry of what they do day in and day out. But it's bigger than that. And I think it's something that we've been doing for so long, and it has to be talked about. This is why it's special to work in healthcare, to be part of somebody's life. And I think the thing that struck me the most when I was writing this was, these are complete strangers that you're pouring everything into, as you should, because it's a calling, but it takes a toll. And so that's where I commend, the men and women across this industry, but women in leadership leading these types of programs. If it's in a hospital or like Air Methods, we put a special touch to that to highlight, I think, the beauty of what these war zones look like, because that's what it is. And we have to talk about it. We have to say, what, today I'm struggling. I tell people here, I've had a bad day. It's not you, it's me. And I really encourage people to say that, because it then allows, if Stephanie can say it, I can say it. And it's healthy to talk about it. You have to talk about what you see to be able to cope with it and to still feel. That's the biggest thing that I don't want critical care clinicians across the industry is to not talk about it, because you bury it and it gets buried into some scary places. And that's where I think it's just hard. You don't talk about it.
How do you think medical schools could better prepare students for this? I mean, doctors, nurses, anyone who would be working in these settings, even the people doing the imaging. I mean, I'm sure that it could be very impactful for them as well. Do you feel like there is maybe a missing piece in some of the medical education? Do you feel like it's covered but not shown from other physicians, and so that's why it doesn't stick? Or what do you think about that?
I do. I think it's obvious, when you're talking and you're going through, it's med school, or if it's, nursing school or medic school, whatever, healthcare platform you're in, you're learning about the human body, you're learning about trauma and cancer and all these different diagnoses. But I don't think that we talk about, well, when you see this, it's hard. When you see a patient die for the first time, it's hard, right?
And that's okay, because you're human, and when it's not hard, that's when there's a problem.
You're a machine. That's I think initially how I handled the beginning of my career. I was a machine. I mean, I took admission after admission after admission, and I just buried because I had to. I was in like a survival mode. But initially I thought it was okay. Like I told you, I would pride myself on crying once a year, and it was never planned. But that's when I really started noticing that it wasn't healthy, because like I would get home, and my husband can definitely speak to this. I would get home and I have 3 kids, and I would walk in the door and I felt like my children were like dogs. They were just like sitting there waiting for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even have anything to offer you. I have nothing left. And that's when my husband kind of took me aside and he's like, this is not healthy. And it took somebody that loved me to also be vulnerable, because, right, it's not easy to be like, hey, are you all right? And that really taught me to reach out to a lot of the people that I am leading to say, are you okay? That's usually the first thing I start with. If somebody has an outburst, or if somebody, has this passionate whatever of how they're reacting that's somewhat out of the norm, or an outburst, my first question I say is, you shouldn't have acted like that. No. Are you okay? That's what I usually ask. Are you all right? Are you doing
well, it's
okay?
so true, because anger is a secondary action. It's something else is leading it. So
right. And grief is messy.
Grief is messy.
Right. Historically, there's this, the 5 stages of grief, and, they do this beautiful, bell curve. No, mine's all over the place. Mine's like a ball of yarn that, you threw up in the air and then you're trying to put back together. That's kind of our human spirit.
Well, also, most people have one traumatic event, maybe a couple traumatic events, and then they work through the grief, and it's messy, but it's so different when every single day you're experiencing traumatic event after traumatic event after traumatic event.
Correct. And if you don't deal with that.
Mm.
The outcomes are awful. 55% of nurses right now are saying they would never go back into nursing. It was a study I just read. 55%. And, this year specifically within critical care, you've got people just walking away and they're like, it's not worth it for me anymore. And that's where, like I told you, that's what keeps me up at night is their spirit, making sure that, we're giving them the tools and the support they need to, handle the things they see. Because I'll tell you, within Air Methods, there's nobody that I would rather prefer, they can transport my kids, my family, me. I trust them wholeheartedly, and because they're the best. But we also have to take care of the best. You have to take care of them and make sure that, you can put those tiny slices back in. It's just, that's how we get over this, is by talking about it. And I think the more people, I've given this talk, I used to I do a talk called Good Grief, it stems from Charlie Brown. I've done it a couple times, and it's very much resonated with the audience that I've given it to. And I think that's my hopes for today, are, really highlighting, women in leadership today. It's not easy. I think what we do, it's not easy. But when you're passionate about it and this is something that you love, it comes out in the right ways, right? And I think that's where that nurturing nature, that I used to kind of not have because I was so burnt out. I'm very in tune to taking care of myself and creating that work-life balance. Work is always going to be there. I used to miss big things with my family. You don't get those back. And so I think where you really tell people work is always there, right? Like, I love my job, my job is the best. But I also, to be at my best, I have to take care of myself and not miss those moments. And that's where the shift in leadership and just overall human compassion needs to change.
In an ideal world, what does the future look like for good grief in medicine?
I think good grief in medicine has to be, you make time for what's important. And that is one thing that cannot be put to the side. You have to talk about it within this current healthcare environment where, stress is at an all-time high. Patients are sicker than they've ever been. You have to make this part of your curriculum. You have to make this part of your business plan to really make sure that you're taking care of your own. It has to be part of your retention strategy, has to be part of your engagement. And I think the way that you really change that is having your frontline workers on these work groups, developing the protocols of what support looks like. And that's what we're currently doing here is, I think I know what they need, but I need also their involvement in 2021 in the helicopter airframe, right? I'm not doing that day in and day out. I need them telling me, this is what's helpful for us. This is what we need. And so kind of, I think, I can only speak for what some of the pieces we're looking at, but, what are those triggers for the transports? It's typically pediatric patients. It's very traumatic things that you see. If it's a scene accident and there's, bodies just laying everywhere, that alone, that's impactful, right? You see somebody and I'm going to say it, you see somebody that's decapitated on a highway, you can't unsee it, right?
Yeah.
So how do you help them process what they saw, that it's not normal? It's okay for that to impact you. You can cry, you can let it out, please let it out. And we have to support one another. So I think how you shift it is you talk about it. Brene Brown is my hero. If I ever talk to her person to person, I mean, she's also changed my life. She doesn't know it. She's changed many, but I think she, her highlights to grief and vulnerability have been so impactful. And it gives people a platform to say, it's okay. And she gave a great example in one of her books. And she talks about basically this well. And I think it's a great example that I can try to illustrate is you look in a well and say one of your colleagues is down there. It's dark, it's cold, it's kind of like depression, right? You look down there and you're like, oh, how you doing down there? There's a difference between empathy and sympathy. When you're looking down there and you're like, okay, well, it's dark down there, looks pretty cold. Sorry, it's so scary, but see you later. Good luck. Good luck to you. It's another thing to actually climb down in the well and say, listen, I don't have the right words to say. This is, I think, where we struggle as healthcare workers because we want to fix it. Can't fix it. But what you can do is you can sit down there and say, listen, I don't know what to say. I don't have the right words. I know how this impacted me. I don't know how it impacted you, but I'm going to sit next to you and I'm right here. That's what support looks like in 2021 moving forward. It's sitting next to somebody, not saying, you know what, oh, just go to sleep, or oh, go for a run, it'll get better. It may and may not, but knowing that you can just sit with them in their grief or whatever they're dealing with, that's what helped me when I have dealt with many different things. And so when Brene kind of highlighted that, I was like, oh my gosh, she hit the nail on the head. Because you need someone sitting alongside of you saying, you know what, me too. Me too. I felt that way. I don't feel that way today, but I'm here for you. And I've sat with colleagues, we've literally just sat there in silence and cried together, no words. And that is power.
That is so impactful, Stephanie. And thank you for your courage, because approaching it in this way is so courageous and is what medicine needs, and it's what patients need. It's critical, the work that you're doing there at Air Methods and with the providers that are there working in the emergency medical services. It truly is critical. So thank you so much for your leadership in this.
Hey, for me, it's an honor. I love critical care medicine. Fell in love with it. It's funny, I tell people all the time, in the beginning of my career, I said 3 things. I said, I'll never be in leadership, I will never take care of children, and I will never do critical care. Because all 3
and literally all of those things.
That's what I'm doing now. So the biggest thing I can tell this audience is never say never. Really follow your gut with where you're being guided. For me, I've always done what I didn't think I could do. And I'm doing the work that I truly feel God has intended me to do. And it's not easy. It's taken a toll. I've been confused along the way. Oftentimes I think even as leaders, we talk about imposter syndrome, that you're like, why am I doing this? What am I doing? I'm not doing this right. And the best thing that I can tell you at the end of the day is, I think when you just try to do the right thing at the end of the day, I have these 4 rules, and everybody in this company, they know them. At least I've talked to all of our new hires about them. My leadership team knows them, but they're still.
Oh, I'm so excited to know them now. And I'm sure our community is as well.
My 4 rules, which I did have an intensivist that also kind of had these, she called them her specific rules, and she was an amazing doc. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to steal like an artist. There's this book called Steal Like an Artist, but it's amazing. But I kind of adapted my own rules. So 4 clean rules that I have are: tell the truth. If you make a mistake, own it. Do the right thing, and be nice. Those 4 pivotal, simple rules. At the end of the day, take vulnerability, because if you make a mistake and you have to own it and speak up and tell the truth, and at the end of the day, do the right thing so that you can make sure it doesn't happen to somebody else. It's hard. It's not easy as it sounds, right?
Especially in medicine, where you can lose your job if, depending on how it goes. And so you have this kind of sub fear, but knowing, no, I can speak to the normalcy of how hard this is, and that will keep me from making errors, is impactful.
And that's the safety culture and the just culture that we're creating at Air Methods. Safety is our state. It's all things, encompasses everything we do here. Everybody comes home safe. That's our mission. Everybody comes home safe. Everybody. And so to be able to provide that care and that vulnerability, we have to set the example. I have to set the example to my clinicians out in the field to say, listen, if you've made a mistake, it's okay. You need to speak up. And we're going to look at the root cause of why it happened, right? That's the beauty of evidence-based medicine. And that's across the industry within healthcare, continuous improvement, evidence-based, medicine moving us forward. That's the focus. And it's always at the end of the day about making sure our patients get the best possible chance at life.
Yes.
And that's what we do here, right? What better thing to be a part of, but it's hard. And it's hard to make a mistake. And that's, again, where the grief all comes in. You say to yourself, well, gosh, do I have to say something? Is somebody going to judge me? Are they going to think that I'm stupid because I made a mistake?
It's like, no, you need to do this for yourself and for the people around you and for your patients.
Perfect. And that's, I think, where we've made great strides here as leadership teams across, all the different leaders across the company. That is our charge. We are, how you change this and how you fix it. It's a just culture. It's supporting the human spirit. but it's also putting those pieces back in. And that's for me as a female leader, that's what I'm drawn to do. I am drawn to put the pieces back for my people and to relate to them, knowing that I've been there. You know, I've made some pretty significant mistakes in my career. And it's not easy to talk about, but why I continue to do it is because I've had people say, thank you. Thank you for saying that, because I've been there. I've had those dark times. And for me, my team and my family pulled me out.
Stephanie, you are an absolute powerhouse. Where can our listeners find you online?
Anywhere. No, I can attach an email. Happy to provide that. Happy to speak anywhere, to anyone. I think that, for me, I really like to partner and share anything that I have studied, over the years that contribute to, healing the human spirit. And that for me, I've dedicated from those sentinel events that I've been a part of, I've dedicated the rest of my career to quality and safety, to really provide our clinicians with the best resources that they can have. I could go on and on and on. So
happy. It's fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I really appreciate this critical conversation on this very important topic. Hopefully we'll be able to share this far and wide and get it wherever we can and get your message out there. It's so critical right now, more than ever. Quick question before you go. Did you happen to bring some tea with you today?
Sure do.
While we're spilling the tea, I love your Yeti. Does it actually keep things hot and cold?
Yes, it does. I love this cup. I absolutely love it. It stays warm all day. So, and I continuously refill.
Oh, that's awesome. Are you a coffee person? Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Dunkin' or Starbucks or any other?
So and you're going to laugh, but we drink Black Rifle coffee. It's spectrum supported. Really, I love all coffee, but we have a subscription to them, and I make my colleagues laugh really hard because of some of the names of the coffees. And yeah, they're pretty intense, but they keep me going. So
Black Rifle coffee. That's amazing. That's the name of it?
Yes, Black Rifle Coffee.
That's fantastic. We'll definitely have to have people check that out. That's awesome to support the veterans, in addition to the amazing work you're doing.
To say that.
No, I know, it's too good. Too good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Stephanie. And thanks for joining us, folks. This is Hit Like a Girl podcast. You can find us on the website, now on YouTube. For more esteemed guests like this one today, you can check us out. And I hope all of you have an amazing day forward. Cheers.
Cheers.